So to create a new project, just open the Android Studio and click on the new project and choose the empty compose activity. Then next, name your app. I am just going to call it drawing app. Hit finish. Let the project build itself. So first we will create a Kotlin file for the drawing app from which we will render all the components. So let's create a new Kotlin file. We will call it drawing app. The first component that we want to build is the app bar. So let's build the app bar first. So we can say composable function drawing bar, and it's going to have a delete function to delete the drawing. So we can say on delete. It's going to be of type unit. This is how you declare functions in Kotlin. Then we can bring in the top app bar composable. So we can say top app bar. So the first thing is we need to give it a title. So for title we can say title, and here we can provide a text for it. So for text we can simply bring the text composable component, and we can remove this text and just can simply call it drawing app. Okay, and then after the title we can give it action to it. So we can say actions. Inside this actions we can provide an icon for it. So let's say icon button, which also require an on click function. So here on click we can provide the on delete function that we declare with the drawing bar, and we can provide a content for it to give it the icon. So for content we can say icon, choose the image vector. So here for image vector we can say icons dot default dot delete, and for content description you can pass null, and then we can remove these curly braces. So I'm just going to get rid of it, and you can also get rid of these curly braces. And now our drawing bar is ready. So to call in the main activity function, we need another function from where we will call all our composable functions. So let's call it at composable function. Let's call it drawing app. So to render app bar, we need to use scaffold composable. The scaffold composable implements the basic material design. This scaffold component provides API to put together several material components to construct your screen by ensuring proper layout strategy for them to work collectively. So we can say scaffold. So in this course we will use it to render the app bar and the drawer body. So to bring in the top app bar we can say top app bar or top bar, and here we can provide the drawing bar in curly braces. So drawing bar, and we can pass the a function for the on delete function later, because we don't have the painting yet, so we don't need to delete anything. So now we can call this drawing app in our main activity. So let's do that. So in main activity, I am just going to delete this greeting function, and I'm also going to delete this surface composable, and here I will just call my drawing app, and we can delete all of these functions, we don't need them. And let's choose this Pixel 3a device, and I'm gonna run it. So our app is up and running, so everything seems fine, so we can move forward with our drawing application. Now we need to create the draw body, which will render the drawing tools and the drawing canvas. So let's go to our drawing app, and here we will create a composable function for draw body. So let's create it here. We will say add composable function, and we can say it draw body. We can stop the emulator for now. So this draw body requires a draw path to draw on a canvas. So let's create a data class to define the property of path state. So we will create a data class here. We can say data class path state, and it's going to have three variables: a path, a color, and a stroke. So we will say var path of type path. So we need to select this one, the second one, android dot no, we need to select the android x dot compose dot ui dot graphics. So be careful with that. And then we need the color. So this one is going to be very simple, variable color and color, and you can select the compose ui dot graphics dot color. And lastly we need the stroke value. So we will say val stroke, and this is going to be of type float. Now we can provide this path state data class as an argument for the draw body. So here on the draw body we can say paths of type, it's going to be of type mutable state. So mutable state, then we will have a mutable list inside of this mutable state, because there will be many colors and many stroke. So we can say mutable list, and then we can finally provide the path state. So we can say path state. Inside this body we need a box in which we can render the drawing tools and canvas. So let's create the box. So we can say box, and let's give it a modifier of fill max size, so it will take the entire screen. So for that we can say modifier dot fill max size. So to draw something on the canvas we need two things, a color and a brush. So let's define that. So first we will create a default color and a default brush. So we can say value, and we can say a draw color, and we will use remember function to set a default color. So we can say remember, and here we will say mutable state of color. dot black to set the black color as a default color. So this is the way to define a default value in Jetpack Compose. Now we need the default brush. So we will do the same thing with the brush also. So we can say value draw brush, and we will say remember, and here we will say mutable state of, and we can provide the value of 5f. So this will be the default value of the stroke of the brush. Then we can also create a set of multiple colors so that we can quickly toggle between colors without setting colors from the color picker. So we can say value used colors, and here we will say again remember, and we can say mutable state of again, and here we need multiple colors, so we can use mutable set of. So we can say mutable set of, and in this we can provide multiple items. So we can provide color dot black and color dot red, and we can provide a gray color also. So we can say color dot gray. Now we need to add this value to the path so that every change of brush or color can start a new path and save old one in the used color list. So for that we can say paths dot value dot add, and here we need to provide the path state. So we can say path state, and it asking for an argument of path. So we can say path equal to path, and we can select this androidx.compose.ui.graphics. Then it requires the color, so we can say color equal draw color, and it also requires the stroke. So here we need to provide draw color dot value, and after that we need to provide the stroke value. So we can say stroke equal draw brush dot value. We can actually slide it little bit here so you can see all of the stuff. Now we need to build the drawing tools which contains the color picker and brushes with different strokes. So let's first build the color picker component. So let's create a new Kotlin file. Let's call it color picker. Here I will say add composable. Let's call it function color picker, and it's also going to need a function to select the color. So we can say on color selected, it's going to be of type unit. So let's define the unit. So we have a typo mistake here. So the first thing we will have is the text. So let's say text. To say it that we need to drag it to change the color. So we can say drag to change the color, and we can provide some styling for it. So we can say style material theme dot typography dot, we have a bunch of options here, so you can select anyone you want. I am going with the subtitle one, and then we can give it a little bit of padding. So for padding we have to bring in the modifier, so we can say modifier dot padding, and let's give it 8 dp of padding, and we need to import the dp, so alt plus enter. Then we need a value to measure the screen width, so we can say value screen width. So to measure the screen width we need a local configuration, so we can say local configuration dot current dot screen width dp dot dp. But the dp does not work for this particular problem because we need the screen width in pixel, so we need to convert this screen width into pixel. So we will say value screen in pixel, and here we will say width, and here we will need to provide local density, so we will say local density dot current, and then we can provide this screen width to convert into pixel, so we can say screen width dot to px to convert it to pixel. Then we need a variable to set a default active color, so we can say var active color, and here we will use by remember, so we will say by remember, and we can say mutable state of color dot black, and maybe we need to import something, so we need to import this get value and mutable state of, so let's import it. We also need to import the set value, so let's do that, and we are good to go. Then we also need a drag offset variable so that we can change the value of the color of the draggable icon as we move the icon itself. So for that we will say value drag offset, and here we will say remember, and we can initialize with 0 value, so we can say mutable state of 0f. Now we need to create a linear color map on which we can display all the colors. So for that we need to create a box composable, so let's create the box, and here we have again a typo again. So let's create our box modifier, sorry, box composable, so we will say box, and here let's give it some padding, so we can say modifier dot padding, and I'm gonna give it 8 dp of padding. So to create a color map we can actually define a spacer of some height which can work as a slider path, and we can fill it with various colors. So let's define our slider path, so we can say spacer, and let's give it height of 10 dp, so we can say modifier dot height, let's give it 10 dp. Then we can say fill max width, so it can take the entire width of the screen. Let's make it rounded corner shape, so we can say dot clip, and we can call our rounded corner shape, and we can give the round of 4 dp. Now we need to create a color map gradient, so we can set that color map as a background. So let's create a color map gradient. So here in outside of this function we can say function color map gradient, and it requires screen width in pixel. So we can say screen width in px, which is of type float. Then here we can say equals brush dot horizontal gradient, and here it requires a couple of arguments. So first is color. So for colors we can say we need to create a color map for this color argument. So let's create a color map. So here we will say function create color map, and it's going to be of type list. So list of type colors. No, we don't need the small braces, we need curly braces. So now we can create a for loop to generate various colors in 2 incremental steps. So to do that we can just say for, and we will say I in 0, and we need a range from 0 to 360. So for that we can say dot dot 360. So this is how you provide range in for loop, and then we need to increment it by 2. So for that we can just say step, and we can provide the step number. So here we can say 2. So it will increment the I by 2. So what happening here is that the value of I is increasing by 2 after every iteration up to 360. So if you decrease this value of 360, then you will not get all the colors on the slider. So it's important that this for loop goes up to 360. Then we need two value to create random saturations and lightness. So we can create the spectrum. So we can say value random saturation equals, we will say 90 plus, we will call the random function. So Kotlin dot random, and we can say dot next float into 10, and we will do something similar for random lightness. So we can say random lightness equal to 50 plus random dot next float into 10. Then we need a value for HSV. So HSV describe the way colors combine each other to create the spectrum that we will get in the slider. So here we will say val HSV equals, here we need to get the HSV to color function. So we will say color dot we need to import it actually. So we will say android dot graphics dot color dot HSVT to color, and here because it's a float, all these values are in float, we need to call the function float array of. So we will say float array of and here we can say I to float to convert it to float, and then we can provide the other two variables, random saturation and random lightness. Then we need to add this color to the color list. So here we need to declare a color list. So we will say value color list equal mutable list of and we need to provide the type color. So now we can add this HSV to the color list. So we can say here color list dot add, and we can call this as a HSV color. Let's just pass this HSV color, and then we need to just return this color list. So we can say return color list. So now our create color map is ready to use. So here we will say create color map, and here we need to provide the starting point. So we will say start text 0f, and for ending we need to provide the screen width in pixel. So let's go to the spacer, and here we can now set the background. So we will say dot background. We need to be inside of this spacer component. So here we will say background, and here we need to provide the brush. So brush equals color map gradient, and here we need to provide the screen width. So we will say screen width in pixel. We need to provide this one, so we will say screen in pixel. After background we need to create a pointer input to process the input from the user input. So after background we can say dot pointer input, and we need to provide a key for it. So we will say, we will just name it painter, and then we can open the curly braces to provide the pointer input scope. So here we can say detect tap gesture, then we can create a variable for offset. So we will say offset, and then we can set the drag offset that we created earlier to offset dot x. So as we move the icon we need to update the active color. So we need to create another function that can change the color of the brush. So we can say we need to create a function for get active color. So let's create another function. So here we will say function get active color, and we need a drag position argument which is of type float, and we also need the screen width. So we will say screen width, which is also type of float, and this function is itself of type color. So we will say color, and then we can open the curly braces. So here we need a variable for hue. So we will say val hue equal drag position divide by screen width into 360f to get the view color. So view is actually a part of HSV color format. HSV is closer to how humans perceive color, it has three components: hue, saturation and value. So this color space describes colors in terms of their shade and their brightness value. And HSV and HSB refer to the same color model. You must have here HSB, which is used in Adobe Photoshop. So after this hue value, we need random saturation again. So we will just we can just copy these two value and paste it here, and then we need to return the color. So we will say return color, and here we need to again say android dot graphics dot color dot hsv to color, and here again we need to say float array of, and here we need to provide the hue color and random saturation and random lightness. Now we can use this get active color. So let's go back to our box, and after drag offset we can say active color equal get active color, and here we can set it to drag offset dot value and screen in px, and then we need to provide the function for selecting the color. So we can say on color selected dot invoke, and we can set the active color, and we are not getting the active color. Here we need to actually get the value from drag offset, so we need to say drag offset dot value, and still we are having some problem with active color. What is saying? So we are having some problem with this on color selected dot invoke. So let's see where we define this on color selected. So yeah, here we actually forget to provide the color, that's why it was unable to take the active color. So we need to define the type of this function, that's why it was giving us the error. And we can also align it to center. So here after the background we can say dot align, and then we can say alignment dot center. So now that we have built the color picker spectrum, let's see how it looks on the emulator. So for that we need to create a file for drawing tools. So let's create another Kotlin file for drawing tools. So let's say Kotlin file, and where we will say it drawing tools, and here we will just again say add composable, and we will call it function. Let's call it tools, and it require argument for draw color. It require actually more arguments, but for now we just need this draw color argument, so we can render the color picker, and it's going to be of type mutable state of color. Let's open the curly braces, and here we need to declare a column, so we will say column. Let's give it some property, so we will say modifier equals modifier dot padding, and we need a horizontal padding, so we will say horizontal equals 8.dp, and let's import the dp, inside this column we can call our color picker. So we will say color picker, and for on color selected we can say, we can create a variable here. So variable color with a lambda function, and here we will just say draw color dot value equal color. So it will set the color of draw color. Okay, here we imported the wrong color. Actually we need to provide the compose, and now we are good to go. So now we can actually remove this import, because no, we need to remove this one first, otherwise it will import that one. So let's see if we can remove. Yeah, now we have the option to select the import. So we will select the androidx.compose.ui.graphics, and now it should work. So now in the drawing app function we will call this function with the draw color parameter. So in the drawing app, after the path we will say, we will call this function the tool function. So we will say tools, and we need to provide this argument draw color. So we will just do that, and then we need to call this draw body into this drawing app function, because this is our opening function that get called in main activity. So we need to call this drawing app, sorry, we need to call the body, drawing body, draw body into our drawing app. So we will say here draw body, and it's again required an argument for path, because this draw body has a path as an argument. So let's create a variable for path. So for that we can say value path equal remember, and here we will say mutable state of, and then it's a list, so we will say mutable list of, and here we need to provide the type of list. So we will say path state, because this one is also path state. So the signature should be same in both case. Okay, so now we can remove this equal button or equal sign, and let's run it and see. So you can see that we are able to render both our text and the color spectrum. So we can play a little bit with it and see how this spectrum works. So we can go to the color picker, and remember what I said about this for loop. So let's play with this for loop, and let's bring it down to 180, and now if I run it, you will see the effect of it. So you can see that we are not getting all of the colors, because we are not going through 0 to 360. Similarly, we can get much bigger colors. I mean, we can lose a lot of colors if we can increase this step to, let's say, 20. Then we will lose a lot of colors. It will be difficult to pinpoint, but you will see the effect. Well, it's difficult to see the effect, but we will test it again when we will have the draggable icon and the canvas itself. but right now we don't have it, so it's difficult to say. So let's go back to 2 and we will play with it again. Now we can create the draggable icon on color spectrum or the color picker. So let's define the minimum and maximum value for the starting and ending points for the draggable icon. So we can say value minimum equals 0.dp, and for maximum we can say value max equal screen width minus 32.dp. We are decreasing it by 32 dp so it won't clip the edge at the right side of the screen. The max value depends on the screen width, so if you have a smaller width then you can decrease it by less dp. So adjust this value according to your screen width. Okay, then we need to convert this minimum and maximum value to pixel. So let's do that. So we can say value min px and max px equals, we can say width, and we can say local density dot current, and then we can say min dot to px to convert it to pixel, and then we can say to max dot to px. Now we can bring the icon on top of the color picker because we are using the box composable, which is useful to put things on top of each other. So here we will say icons. We need to select the image vector. So the icon that I want to use is a part of extended material icons. So we need to declare the dependency. So to do that we need to open the app level build.gradle file, this one. You can see that here it's called .app. So we need to open this build.gradle file, and then here at the end we can say implementation Android X dot compose dot materials, and here we have the materials icon extended, so we need to select this one, and we need to use a higher version because this version is quite older. So we can say 1.2.0 hyphen alpha 06, and let's sync it. So the sync is complete. You can run a higher version of this material icons extended like alpha 08 if you are using the latest Android Studio. I am running the January 2022 Android Studio, so I cannot run the latest version, but this version will work on old as well as on newer Android Studio. Now we can declare our icon that we want to use. So the icon I want to use is icons dot default dot fiber menu record, and for content description you can pass null. Then we need the tint color, so here we will say tint. Tint is the color that will be shown on the icon, which will depends on the selected color. So if you select red color on color picker, then this icon will also show red color. So for tint we can use the active color. So set the active color as tint. Then we need to provide the offset value so we can pinpoint the location of the icon after dragging. So we can say modifier equals modifier dot offset, and here we will use the int offset. So we will say int offset, and we need to provide the x and y values. So we will say drag offset dot value dot round to int. So we will get the rounded value, and then we can say 0. So this offset modifier offset the content by in pixel, and then this int offset construct int offset from x and y position int values. So because we are not moving on y-axis, so that's why we have 0 for the second argument. Then we can use a border modifier to create a circle shape border around the icon. So for that we can say, here we will say dot border, and we need to provide the border stroke. So we will say border stroke, and it requires width and color. So for width we will say 4.dp, and for color we will say materials theme dot colors dot on surface. Then we can provide the shape for it. So for shape we will say shape equal circle shape. Now we need to give it the functionality for draggable so it can move. So we will say after the border, so after border we will say dot draggable. So this draggable modifier configure the touch dragging for the UI element in a single orientation, which means it can move on either x-axis or y-axis, and we want to move on the y-axis, right? So we need to provide orientation for it. So we will say orientation, so orientation dot horizontal. Then we want to preserve the value of this drag so it can move forward and backward in its range. So for that we need to create a state. So we will say state, and here we need to create a rememberable draggable state function. So we will say remember draggable state, and here we need to create a variable for the delta value. So we will just say delta followed by arrow function. We need the curly braces to create the delta variable, so we will remove this, and then we will say delta followed by arrow function. So delta is the variable which will keep the calculation that how much the icon has moved in both directions. So we need to calculate the new value after every movement of the icon. So we can say value new value equals drag offset dot value plus delta. We also need to make sure that this drag offset value never goes beyond the min px and max px. So for that we can use coarsein function, which ensures that this value lies in the specified range. So we will say drag offset dot value equals new value dot coarsein, and here we will just say min px and max px. Then we need to define the active color. active color equals get active color, and we can say drag offset dot value and screen in px, same as we did in the spacer. So we will set active color for the icon in the same way as for the spacer, and we will also use the on color selected method. So we will say on color selected dot invoke, and here we will just provide the active color. So these two last parameters will be same for both icon and spacer or color picker. So let's run it and see if we get everything right. So let's run it. So the app is up and running, and we have our icon with the default color black. So let's move it and see if it's moving. So you can see that as we move, it changes the color. So it's working and it's looking great. So now we will build the color strip where we will show some default colors in the beginning, and then as we select new colors from color picker, we will update this color strip. So after the color picker, we need to define a row composable. So let's do that. So a row composable is a composable layout which give the ability to place items in a row layout fashion. So in this row, we need some properties to define the background of the color strip. So what we want is a background that will start from gray color and end with black color. So this kind of background is called gradient background or gradient background color scheme. So we need to build a horizontal gradient background. So let's do that first. So we need to create a new function. So we will say here, so we will say function modifier dot horizontal gradient background. Then we need to define colors property for this horizontal gradient background. So we will say colors. It's going to be of type list of colors. So we can say color, and we can choose compose.ui.graphics. Then we need another gradient background function so that we can use it for horizontal gradient background. So we will create another function for it. So here we will say function modifier dot gradient background, and this one is also requires colors parameter. So we will just say colors of type list color. Then it need a brush provider. So we will say brush provider, and it's going to be of type, not type, but it's going to be a function actually, which will have two properties, color and size. So for color, it's going to have a list of colors. So we will say list of colors, and size. So we will say size, and then we can define the function of brush. So we will say brush. Then we can declare the typing of it. So it's a type of modifier. So we can say modifier. Look like I got the typo mistake here. So let's correct it, and let's say size. So this one androidx.compose.ui.geometry, and now we can declare this function. So now we need to bring in the composed function. So let's do that. So we will say composed. This compose function is this composed function provides just-in-time composition of a modifier that will be composed for each element it modifies, which means it allows you to inject hoisted state into an element specific modifier. So we need to define some variables for it. So the first thing we need is the size. So we will say var size, and we will use by remember function. So we will say by remember, and we can say mutable state of, and then we can provide the size of it. So we will say size dot 0. Then we need to import get and set. So import get value. Let's get it back in one line. Then we can create another variable or value for gradient. So we can say value gradient, and we will use remember function as well. So we will say remember, and then we will say colors and size. We need here small braces, not curly braces. So here we will say remember, and we can provide these two values for it. We can remove this extra curly brace, and then here we can open this local function, and we can say brush provider for colors and size. So we will say colors and size. Then we will use the draw with content function, which allow us to draw before or after the layout's content. So we will say draw with content, and here we will just provide the size. So size equals this dot size, and we need to call the draw rect function. So we will say draw rect equals, we need to provide brush parameter. So we will say brush equal, and we can pass the gradient color. Then finally we need to call the draw content function to draw the content. So draw a rectangle with a given offset and size, and if no offset from the top left is provided, then it's drawn starting from the origin of the current translation. If no size is provided, then the size of the current environment is used. So now we can get back to horizontal gradient background here, and here we can say gradient background that we have just created, and we can pass colors argument here. Then we can open the curly braces to run a local anonymous function. So here we will have two parameters or variables, gradient color. So we will say gradient colors and size, and then when we can run the arrow function, we need to remove this equal sign. Then we can brush dot horizontal gradient, and here we need to provide colors for it. So we will say colors equal gradient color, and we need to provide the starting position as I mentioned earlier. So for starting position we can say start text equals 0f, and then we can provide the ending position as well. So we will say end x equals, here we need to provide a comma, and then we can say end x, and we can set it by saying size dot width. So it will take it from the size width. Now the horizontal gradient background is ready to use in the row. So we should get back to row, and here we can say modifier equals modifier dot gradient horizontal gradient background, and it needs two colors to form a horizontal gradient background, one for starting color and one for ending color. So we can provide this two color using a list. So we can say list of, and here we need to pass two colors. So we will say color dot gray and color dot black. So the strip will be start from gray color and end with black color. Then we need some paddings, so let's give it some padding. We will say horizontal 8 dp and vertical 4 dp. And then we also need the functionality of scrolling, so we can say horizontal scroll equals, remember, scroll state. So we can choose this function for enabling horizontal scroll. And then we need to call the animate content size. So we will say animate content size. So let's run it and see if we get our color strip or the horizontal gradient background. So let's run it. So the app is up and running, and you can show that we have created this small row of two colors. You can clearly see that there is gray color and black color, but because this row is not filled with any icon, it's showing very small row. So once we will fill this row with icons, it will show the full picture or the full background. So we will continue building this row. So let's fill this row with icons of pre-populated colors, and later when we draw something on the canvas using different colors apart from the listed colors, then this row of icons will extended by itself with new colors. So we need a new parameter for this function tool. So I want to mention one thing here. When I say parameter or properties or arguments, I refer to the same thing. They all mean same thing. It is just that throughout the years that I have been doing programming, in some languages they are called arguments, and in some languages they are called props or properties or parameter, and it's completely language specific, but they all mean same thing, so don't get confused. So let's declare this new parameter for tools function. So it's called used color. So we will declare here used color, which is going to be a set. So we will say mutable set, and it's going to be a set of color, so we can provide the color. Now we will use this set of used color to run through for each loop of an icon to display different colors. So in this row function we will say used colors dot for each, and here we need to define icon. So we will say icon, we need to select image vector, and we will set, and we will say icons dot wait icons dot default dot star. So I am choosing this star icon for this icon, and for content description I can always pass null. Then we need to provide a tint color. So the icon can be filled with a color, so we can say tint equals, we can say it. So whatever the use color will be the tint, and then we can say modifier equals modifier to give it some padding, modifier dot padding. Let's give it 8 dp of padding from all sides, and then we can make it clickable. So we can actually select the color. So we can say clickable, and we can run a small function in it. So we will say clickable draw color dot value equals 8. Now we need to update the tools function in draw body function, because now this tool function has two parameters. So we need to go to drawing app, and here we need to provide the second parameter. So we will say here used colors dot value, and let's run it and see if this list get updated. So let's run it. So you can see that now we have generated the three colors, and now the row is also looking quite good. And you can see that we are using this used color dot value, and this use color is taken from this mutable set of colors. So these three colors are passed. So the last thing remains for this tool function is a floating button to display buttons for various stroke, so that we can choose different thickness for the brush. So we need to declare another parameter for this tool function. So let's say draw brush, which is going to be of type mutable state, and we need to provide the typing of float, then comma. Let's format the code. We also need two more variables for showing and hiding brushes, and for defining the stroke for the brush. So after the row we can define the variables. So here I will say var show brushes by remember, and here I will say mutable state of false. So it's a boolean type of variable. And then we need another value for strokes. So for strokes I can say val strokes equals remember, and here I will say I will provide the value from 1 to 50. So I can say 1 dot dot 50, and then I need to provide the steps. So we can say step, and then we can provide the value for increment. So I can say 5. So it will increase in so it will increase by 5 at every iteration. And then we need to add this to a list. So we can say dot to list to create a list of it. Here we are using var instead of val, because val is final and var is not. So whenever you declare a variable using val, the value for that variable is final, which means it cannot be changed. But the value of var is not final, it can be changed. We are using var for show brushes because we will show and hide the brushes with this variable. So because of that we don't want to lock it with one value. So when the brush is showing, its value will become true, and by default this value will be false. So in the beginning all brushes will be hidden, and when we click the button all the brush will be shown. So now we can declare our floating action button. So we can say floating action button, and here we need to provide a function for on click. So for on click we can say show brushes equals is show brushes is not equal to show brushes. So every time you will click, it will change from false to true and then true to false. Then we can give it some padding. So for padding we can say modifier dot padding, and we need vertical padding. So we will say vertical 4.tp. Then we need to provide an icon for it. So for that we can say icon, and again we need to select the image vector 1, and here we can provide icons dot default dot brush, and for content description we can pass null, and we need to provide the tint color. So when we change the color it will show on the icon as well. So we can say tint equal draw color dot value. Now we need to bring the animated visibility composable, which animates the appearance and disappearance of its content when the animated visibility is in a column. So for this composable we need to annotate it with experimental animation AI. So let's do it. So here we need to annotate it with at opt-in, and then we can say experimental animation API class. So after floating action button we can bring in the animated visibility. So we can say animated visibility, and here for visible we can provide the show brushes variable. Now we need to bring in the lazy column as mentioned earlier. So we can say lazy column, and we can remove the content. We don't need the content here. We can open the curly braces. Inside this lazy column we need items function, which contains a list of data. So we can say items, and for the data or key we can provide the strokes. So we can say strokes. Then we need to provide the scope for this lazy column. So we can again open the curly braces, and here we need to provide the button for it. So we can say icon button, and for on click we can say drop brush dot value equals it dot to float. So we need to convert it to float, and we are having some problem with it. So let's see what is it. Unresolved reference. Let's also provide the show brushes equals false. So here we need items and not just one item, so that's why it was showing error. So we need to change it to items. So let's say items, and here we need to provide the list, and it should be fine now. So after show brushes equals false. So what will happen that so whenever we click this icon button, all the icons will disappear and the current value will be selected. Let's give some padding. So we'll say modifier equals modifier dot padding, and let's give it 8 dp padding, and then we need to provide border for it. So we will say dot border, and here we need to provide the border. So for border we need to provide border stroke. So we will say border stroke, and it requires a width parameter. So we will say width equals width local density dot current, and then we need to cast it to dp. So it will change it to dp. After border stroke we need to provide the color for it. So we will say color equals color dot gray, and then we can provide a shape for it. So for shape we can just say circle shape. So that's it for the floating action button, and Let's change our parameters in the tools, in the draw body tools function. So here we need to bring in the new parameter that we declare. So here we will say draw brush, and now we can run the app on the emulator. So let's run it on the emulator. So now the app is up and running, and you can see that the red color is selected. So as we move the icon, the draggable icon, it also changed the color of the floating button. We can also change the color of it from this gradient background, and if we choose it, then it will close. So we can show and hide all the brushes with this floating action button, but none of this works because we don't have our canvas yet. So in the next lecture we will create the canvas. So now the last thing left is the canvas itself, which allow us to draw things. So let's create a new Kotlin file named canvas. So we will say new Kotlin file, and we will name it canvas. Let's create a composable function. Let's call it drawing canvas. So for this function we need three experimentals API. So let's declare them first. So we will say here at opt-in, and the first API is experimental animation API. So we will say animation API class. Then we need the experimental foundation API, and finally we need the experimental compose UI API. So let's just select it from here, and instead of typing all this stuff, we need two colons. So for this drawing canvas we need four properties, which are draw color, draw brush, used color, and path. So let's declare them in the parameters. So we will say draw color, which is of type mutable state, and let's provide the typing, so color. Then draw brush, which is of type mutable state, and the typing is float. Then used colors, it's going to be a mutable state also, and then it contains a mutable set. So we will say mutable set, and then finally we can provide the color, and then we need to bring in the paths that we created in the beginning. So we will say list of type path state. So the first thing we need is a value for current path on which we are drawing. So let's declare that. So we will say value current path. Then we can access it with the paths variable using path dot last dot path. So this last is a function that return the last element from the list. So it basically pinpoint the latest location of the path. Then we need a value for a movement path. So we will say value move path equals remember, and then we will say mutable state of, and here we need to provide an offset. So we will say offset question mark, and then we can initialize it with null. The offset is basically a class which calculates the distance between two origins. So now we can bring in the canvas composable. So we can say canvas, and we can select this one. Let's select the very basic one. So we will select the first one just. canvas, and we can say modifier equals modifier dot fill max size. So we will say dot fill max size, and we need to import the modifier. So we will say androidx.compose.ui, and then we can give it some padding from top. So we can say padding, and we need to leave some space on top. So we need some padding from top so we can show the color picker and the gradient, horizontal gradient. So we will say top equals 100.dp. Let's import the dp, and we don't need the on draw yet, so we'll just remove it. Then we need to provide the pointer int arrow filter. So we will say dot pointer int arrow filter modifier, which provides access to motion events. It contains the API for onTouch event. OnTouch event has a boolean return type. If the provided onTouch event returns true, it will continue to receive the event stream, and if it returns false, then it will not receive the event stream. Now we just need to provide a way to draw the painting. So we will run a when loop inside this pointer int arrow filter. So here we will say when it dot action. We will say we can run a local function here. So here we will say motion event dot action down followed by an arrow function. Then we can open the curly braces. Motion event is a property of pointer int arrow filter which detects the physical gesture, and action down is a constant which indicates that the gesture has started, and it captures initial starting location. So here we will say current path dot move to, and then we can provide the x and y axis location. So we can say it dot x and it dot y. Then we need to provide the used colors. So we will say used colors dot value dot add, and then we can provide the active draw color value. So we can say draw color dot value. Then we have action move, which is also a constant. So we will say motion event dot action move followed by arrow function, and we can run a local function here. So the action move, which is also a constant, detects a change that has happened during a press gesture. So this contains the most recent point. So here we will say move path dot value equals offset, and again we will say it dot x and it dot y. So the last option will be an else statement. So we will say else followed by lambda function, and if nothing happens, then we will say move path dot value equals null, and then we need to make it true. So we will say after this true, and we have some problem for it. Okay, because we did not open the curly braces for the canvas, it's creating a problem. So now it should be gone. So far we have declared the properties of canvas. Now we need to run two local functions for move path and paths. So let's do it for move path first. So we will say move path dot value question mark dot let, and then we will say current path dot line to it dot x and it dot y. Then we need to call the draw path function. So here we will say draw path, and then we just need to provide the three parameters for it. So the first one is path. So for path we will say current path, color. So for color we can say draw color dot value, and for style we can say stroke. We can pass the 2 parameter of draw brush dot value, not 2 parameter, just 1 parameter of draw brush. Then we need to run another local function for path. So let's do that. So after move path function, we can say paths dot for each, and here we will again run the draw path function, and we need to provide the same 3 arguments again. So we will say path equals it dot path, and color equals it dot color to set it to itself, and then style, so we can say stroke it dot stroke. Need to provide a parameter, so we will say it dot stroke. Now we just need to declare this function in draw body composable function. So we need to go to drawing app, and here we will just say drawing canvas, and we can remove the equal sign for all of these parameters. For parts, we need to provide the value of it, so we will say parts dot value. So now our app is complete, so let's run it and see if we built what we wanted to build. So our app is up and running, as you can see now. So let's draw something with default colors. So this is the default black color and default stroke. We can change the stroke from here. So we can click and select a more wider stroke, and let's see what happening. So we are able to draw it, and let's change the color and see if we are able to change the color. So it's working perfectly fine, and the gradient color is also updating as we are changing the color. So all the function seems fine and working. So the only function that's not working is this delete button, because we have not provided the functionality for it. So let's do it. So to make the delete button works, we just need to clear the value of this path. So we will just say here paths dot value equals mutable list of, and since we are not providing it, it will just clear all the things that are drawn on the canvas. So let's run it and see. So let's quickly select a stroke value and change some color, and let's draw something, and let's see if the delete button is working. So now it's working, and all the functionality are behaving well. So that's it for this class.